My name is Silas Montgomery. 72 winters I have seen, and through all of them I believe family was the one foundation that never crumbled. I was wrong. The first sign came with the invitation. Thick cream paper, fancy gold letters, even a ribbon tucked neatly into the fold. My granddaughter, Amelia, was getting married. I held that envelope in my old carpenter's hands as if it were a treasure chest. But as I read the words carefully, I felt my chest tighten. There was no mention of me walking her down the aisle, no seat reserved near the family table, no recognition of the years I had been more of a father to her than her own father ever was. Just a generic line at the bottom. Extended family, welcome. I tried to dismiss it at first. Maybe it's a mistake, I told myself. Maybe they're keeping it simple, maybe they'll explain later. But deep down, a bitter truth settled. I was being pushed to the edges of my own bloodline. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with whispers. My daughter-in-law, a sharp woman with expensive tastes and little patience, made it no secret. Dad should sit near the back. It'll be easier for him, she told someone at the rehearsal dinner, thinking I couldn't hear. The words cut deeper than any saw I'd ever handled. On the wedding day, I arrived in my best suit, polished shoes, and the watch Elena, my late wife, had given me decades ago. The church was glowing with flowers, candles flickering along the aisle. Families laughed, children tugged at ties, photographers clicked away. And me? I stood there, program in hand, scanning row after row for my name. There was no seat, not one. Guests shifted uncomfortably as they realized the old man in the dark suit had nowhere to sit. Some avoided my eyes. Some whispered. My own children pretended not to see me, their faces locked in false smiles. The humiliation burned, but I kept my back straight. If there's one thing life has taught me, it's that dignity is a weapon of its own. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. And just when I thought the sting could not cut any deeper, a movement near the front caught my eye. The groom, tall, confident, a man I barely knew, rose from his chair at the head table. He walked toward me, ignoring the startled looks, and pulled out his own seat. "Mr. Montgomery," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "this chair belongs to you." The room froze. My children flushed red. My granddaughter's eyes welled with tears. And me? I lowered myself into that seat, the weight of years of dismissal lifting for the first time. It wasn't revenge yet, but it was the spark, the moment I realized they could try to erase me, but I would never vanish. The rehearsal dinner was supposed to be about family, about laughter, clinking glasses, and promises whispered before the vows were spoken. That's what I told myself as I buttoned the navy blazer I hadn't worn since Elena's funeral. The fabric was a little tighter, the shoulders heavier, but it carried memories of standing tall when my heart was breaking. Tonight, I needed that same dignity. The restaurant sat in the center of town, all glass windows and white tablecloths, the kind of place that charged triple for meals, small enough to vanish in 2 bites. I pulled into the lot early, because men like me were raised to believe punctuality was respect. But when I stepped inside, I saw the truth. Respect wasn't on the menu. The hostess, a young woman with a perfect bun and a polite smile, looked at her list. Name? Silas Montgomery, grandfather of the bride. Her smile faltered, eyes darting to the sheet. She ran her finger down the page, frowned, then looked back up. I don't see... Oh, wait. She pointed to a line scrawled at the very bottom. Yes, here. They've placed you near the back, table 9. The words landed like a stone in my gut. Near the back, not with family, not with Amelia, the little girl who once fell asleep on my chest while I hummed old hymns. Not with the son I had raised. Back, out of sight, out of mind. I followed her through the glittering room, past tables where family members were already gathering. My daughter-in-law, Cassandra, sat near the head table, her sharp red dress catching the light. She spotted me and gave a smile too polished to be kind. My son, Richard, was beside her, checking his phone as if the world depended on his thumb. Neither waved, neither rose. Table 9 was shoved near the kitchen door. Every time a waiter pushed through with a tray of dishes, the door slapped open, letting out the smell of onions and hot grease. I sat down alone, the chair wobbling slightly, and folded my hands to keep them from shaking. For a while, I watched. Families gathered like constellations, clusters of light, laughter spilling into the air, but in every cluster I was missing. When Amelia swept in, radiant even in her simple rehearsal dress, she made the rounds, hugging her friends, kissing her parents' cheeks, holding Cassandra's hand. Then her eyes flicked toward me, and something inside her faltered. She started to move my way. Cassandra caught her wrist, leaned in, whispered something. Amelia's smile dimmed, and she turned away. I pretended not to notice. Dinner was served in courses too pretty to eat. I pushed food around my plate while whispers floated from the table beside me. A cousin's voice, low but not low enough. "Why's he here?" "Thought Richard said he'd stay home. Old man probably doesn't even know what fork to use." Their laughter was sharp, but what cut deeper was the lack of correction. Richard heard. Cassandra heard. Neither spoke. Halfway through the evening, Richard finally approached. He walked with the careful gait of a man who wanted the world to know he was in charge. He set a hand on my shoulder, light as dust. "Dad," he said, tone too smooth, "hope you're comfortable back here? We didn't want you overwhelmed. It's a lot of people, a lot of noise. This way you can enjoy yourself quietly." I looked up at him, my son, the boy I'd once carried on my shoulders to Little League games. "I don't need quiet," I said. "I need family." His smile tightened, almost imperceptible. "Family's complicated," he murmured. "Just try not to draw attention tomorrow. It's Amelia's day." "It was supposed to be mine, too," I said softly before I could stop myself. "At least a little." He pulled his hand back as though burned. "Don't start, Dad. Please, don't make this about you." Then he turned, his arm sliding around Cassandra's waist as he returned to the glow of the head table. For the rest of the night, I sat in my chair, listening to the clink of glasses, the toasts filled with promises, the laughter that never reached me. The waiters swept past with trays, the door banging against my elbow, reminding me where I'd been placed, at the margins. When the dinner ended, Amelia finally came. Her eyes were glassy, her smile strained. "Grandpa," she whispered, kneeling beside me, "I wanted you closer. I swear I did." "I know," I said, and I meant it, because I could see the war inside her, the love she carried for me, and the pressure her parents pressed on her shoulders. She hugged me quickly, too quickly, then hurried away, Cassandra's eyes following her like a hawk. I drove home in silence, the night pressing in on the windshield. On the seat beside me sat the folded program from the dinner, a reminder of where I stood in their story. Table 9, by the kitchen, a man tucked away like an afterthought. But as I placed my blazer on the hook and set my watch on the dresser, I whispered into the still air, "Not tomorrow. Tomorrow I will not be invisible." And I didn't know it then, but tomorrow, the wedding day itself, would bring humiliation sharp enough to scar. And yet, it would also bring the spark of dignity that no one, not even Richard or Cassandra, could erase. The morning of the wedding broke cold and bright. Frost clung to the edges of the porch railing as I stood outside with my coffee, watching my breath curl into the air. A wedding day is supposed to carry warmth, but all I felt was the weight of yesterday's rehearsal. Table 9, near the kitchen. The memory soured my stomach more than the coffee did. Still, I polished my shoes until they gleamed, pressed my best charcoal suit, slipped Elena's watch into my pocket, the watch she gave me on our 25th anniversary. She had always believed in showing up with dignity, even when the world tried to strip you of it. I whispered her name as I fastened my tie. "Help me keep my back straight, love." The church was already bustling when I arrived. Cars lined the street. Women in long dresses hurried inside with coats pulled tight against the cold. Men adjusted ties and joked loudly. I walked slowly, cane tapping against the steps, though pride kept my pace measured. Inside, the sanctuary glowed. White ribbons curled along the pews, flowers cascaded from every corner, and the air carried the faint sweetness of lilies. Families gathered in clusters, taking photos, laughter bouncing off the tall ceiling. For a moment, my chest swelled. This was Amelia's day. She deserved beauty. But then I looked for my place. Rows of pews stretched wide, each one holding neat white cards, with names printed in elegant script. Cassandra Montgomery, Richard Montgomery, friends of the bride. I moved down the aisle, scanning carefully. My name was nowhere. I circled to the other side, pretending to admire the flowers. Nothing. Guests glanced at me curiously, shifting to let me pass, their eyes sliding away when they realized I was still searching. Near the front, Cassandra sat already, her red coat draped over the pew like a banner. She saw me, tilted her head, and gave the faintest shake. Dismissal as though I should already know. The whispers began almost immediately. A cousin leaned to another. "Did they forget to reserve him a seat?" The reply came back like a knife. "No." It wasn't a mistake. I felt the heat rise in my face, but I kept moving. Row after row, still no name. Finally I stopped, near the back, alone. A pew stood half empty. No card, no recognition. Just a space no one else wanted. I lowered myself there, heart hammering, trying to swallow the humiliation. Guests filed in, filling the rows ahead. I saw Amelia peek from the side door in her gown, radiant and trembling with excitement. Her eyes found me. For a flicker of a second, her smile faltered. She mouthed, "Grandpa," before Cassandra touched her shoulder and turned her back. I clenched my hands until the veins stood out like ropes. The program slipped from my lap and fluttered to the floor. I didn't bend to pick it up. My body felt too heavy. The organ music swelled, guests stood, and Amelia began her walk down the aisle. She was breathtaking, every step filled with grace, and yet behind her beauty I felt like an invisible man, like a ghost attending the celebration of a family that no longer claimed me. Then, as the minister asked guests to be seated, the truth hit me again. Every row was full, every seat occupied, every seat but mine, unmarked, unwanted. I wasn't just sitting alone. I had been left without a seat at all. People noticed. I could feel their eyes like prickles against my skin. They looked from me to the front, to Cassandra and Richard, then back. The shame was public now, undeniable. My children had wanted me erased, and for a moment they had succeeded. I sat in silence, back straight, Elena's watch ticking steadily in my pocket. I would not stand and storm out. I would not give them that satisfaction. I would stay invisible if I had to, until someone saw the truth, and I did not know it. Yet, but before the ceremony ended, someone would. Someone unexpected. The minister asked us to be seated, and the sanctuary turned to a hush of rustling fabric and creaking pews. I stayed where I was at the back, half a pew, no name card, no place among the rows of people who carried my blood. The organs softened to a breath. The lilies in the vases leaned like they were listening. I could feel eyes on the old man with nowhere to sit, the way you feel winter through a window, present even if you pretend not to shiver. At the front, Amelia stood glowing, veil catching the light from the colored glass. Beside her, the groom, tall, trim, a steady posture, watched her with the soft, stunned look of a man who knows he is looking at the rest of his life. I had met him once in passing. Nathan Cole, polite, quiet, the kind of quiet that listens more than it speaks. His gaze slid across the crowd as the first reading began and found me. Something in his face changed. Surprise first, then a question, then a decision. He leaned toward the minister, whispered, and received a small nod. Then he did something no one in that room expected. Nathan stepped down from the altar. A hum rippled through the pews. Cassandra's head snapped toward him, red coat blazing even from where I sat. Richard half rose as if to stop whatever was coming, then froze with one eye on the crowd. The ushers blinked at each other, unsure whether to move. Nathan kept walking down one step, then another, until he reached the front pew where the parents of the bride sat like polished statues. He touched the empty sliver of wood, looked to Amelia's mother, and then turned fully toward me. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, voice carrying cleanly in the vaulted space, "please take my seat." There was no mockery in it, no apology either, just a steady offering, as if this were the most natural thing in the world, a man making room for the elder who had been denied it. For a heartbeat I couldn't stand. The years weighed on my knees, but it wasn't the years, it was the shock. All the whispers of last night, the wobbling chair near the kitchen door, the unmarked pew. Suddenly none of it fit inside the moment that stood open in front of me. I rose. The organist's hands hovered above the keys, then fell away. Even the flowers seemed to hold their breath. I walked the aisle alone, every step a slow reclaiming. Faces turned as I passed. Aunts, cousins, neighbors, the barber who's cut my hair for 40 years. I kept my eyes forward. Elena's watch warmed against my palm like a good luck coin. Cassandra's smile had curdled into something thin and dangerous. Richard's jaw worked, as if chewing a word he didn't want to swallow. Amelia's eyes shone wide and wet. Her lips formed Grandpa again, but this time the sound made it across the room. Nathan stepped aside in the front row and held out his hand to steady me as I lowered myself into the space he'd made. I did not grandstand. He did not bow. He simply placed a hand on my shoulder, respect, not pity, and then returned to his place beside my granddaughter. It should have been a small act, a bit of furniture rearranging, but the air changed, softly, decisively. Where there had been a mean little triumph, there was now a public record. The groom saw what the family refused to see. A murmur rolled to the back pews and stilled there like tidewater meeting rock. I breathed easier for the first time all day. The reading resumed. The minister's voice, which had worn its formal smile like a suit, warmed by a few degrees. Amelia's laughter, light and surprised, floated up at a small stumble in the vows. Even Richard clapped at the kiss, late but loud, as if volume could retake ground already lost. After the recessional, the crowd spilled into the narthex like a shaken snow globe, all motion, all voices. I stayed seated until the aisle cleared, then stood to make the slow walk toward the doors. I did not plan to seek anyone out. I had no appetite for excuses or late-blooming kindness. My dignity felt like a garment that finally fit again. I didn't intend to hand it to the coat check. "Mr. Montgomery." The voice came from my right. Nathan had slipped free from a cluster of handshakes. Up close, he had the kind of face you trust before you know why. Steady eyes, careful angles. He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, not proving anything. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I argued about the seating last night. I lost. Today I wasn't going to lose again." "You didn't," I said. He gave a small breath that might have been a laugh, might have been relief. "Amelia told me who taught her to drive," he said, "who fixed her science projects, who made pancakes shaped like moons when she was too scared to sleep. I couldn't watch you stand." "You've married well," I said, and if my voice shook, it did so in the way a bell does when struck true. Cassandra materialized on cue, Richard a step behind, both of them wearing their practiced expressions. "Nathan," she said brightly, "we need you with the photographer." Family group shots. "In a moment," he said without looking away. It was not defiance. It was priority. "Dad," Richard added lower, a warning dressed as concern. "Let's not make a scene." I glanced at the crowded doorway where guests jostled for coats and compliments. "I'm not making a scene," I said. "I'm standing where your son-in-law asked me to stand." A few heads turned. That word, son-in-law, landed like a stamp. Cassandra's smile tightened until it was almost thin enough to cut with. Nathan cleared his throat, easing the moment back from a cliff. "Sir," he said to me, "not Silas yet, not Grandpa, just a respectful bridge. Would you sit with us at the reception? At the head table. I'll make sure there's a seat." "You've already made sure," I said, and something in my chest, something that had been braced for the next blow, unknotted by one turn. We parted then, the photographer barking names, the wedding planner fluttering clipboards. I stepped outside for air. The sky had that winter blue that makes edges sharper. For a few quiet seconds I stood on the steps and let the cold clean me. I considered going home. There was safety in spare rooms and familiar chairs, in shutting the door against the drafts of other people's choices. But I could hear Elena in the winter brightness. Show up with dignity, even if you're the only one who remembers what it looks like. So I went to the reception. It was held in the renovated armory. Brick walls, strings of lights, white tablecloths like fresh sheets. I braced for the same old theater, a place card missing, a chair gone wandering. But when I reached the head table, there it was, my name, written in a hand I did not recognize, tucked neatly between Amelia Cole and Nathan Cole. No extended family, no back near the kitchen. My name. I took my seat. People noticed. Not everyone approved. The approval no longer seemed necessary. Toast began, the usual parade of stories, college memories scrubbed clean, inside jokes that worked like passwords. When it was Nathan's turn, he lifted his glass and talked about the people who had shaped Amelia's life. The piano teacher who believed in her, the nurse who sat up with her during that long-ago fever, the grandfather who taught her that a straight line is something you choose every time you pick up a tool. He did not look at me when he said it. He did not have to. I didn't cry. Men like me don't, not in public, or if we do, we've taught our faces disciplines our hearts don't share. But I felt the sting behind my eyes and looked down at my hands, wide and scarred, resting on linen that had never expected to hold them. When the music started, Cassandra leaned over my shoulder and murmured, "This won't change anything." Her voice was soft enough for privacy, hard enough to bruise. I turned just enough to let her see I'd heard. "It already has," I said, because it had. A single gesture had tilted the room. The plan that banked on my silence now had to account for my presence. The story they had rehearsed did not include a groom who saw me. And once a story starts to change, other truths have a way of finding their way to the mic. Later, much later, when the cake had been cut and the floor picked clean of the first round of confetti, Nathan found me again at the edge of the room, where the lights were gentler. "I don't know what comes next with your son," he said, careful, "but I want you to know. You belong where she can see you." "Thank you," I said. There were other things I might have said, about wills and whispers, about table nines and kitchen doors, but those were for another day. Today the ledger needed only this entry. Respect was paid publicly in full. On the drive home, I left the radio off and listened to the old car talk to the road. The watch in my pocket ticked the miles. I was not finished, not with the years, not with the facts I had tried not to see about my own blood. A gesture is not a verdict. It's a summons. And now that I had been called back into the room, I intended to stay long enough to let the whole truth stand up beside me. It would not be shouting that carried it there. It would be patience, memory, paper, dignity with a spine. The spark had been struck. Tomorrow I would go looking for tinder. The morning after the wedding, I woke to the quiet hum of the furnace and the tick of Elena's watch on my nightstand. My suit jacket still hung from the chair where I dropped it, faintly carrying the scent of perfume and candle smoke from the night before. It should have been a morning filled with pride, the kind a grandfather feels after watching his granddaughter step into a new chapter of life. But my thoughts kept circling back to that church, that missing seat, and the faces of those who pretended not to see me. I brewed coffee and stood by the window as the town stretched awake. Snow had dusted the rooftops overnight. turning the neighborhood into something that looked pure, though I knew too well purity was a surface thing. Beneath it, bitterness lingered. By noon, I had errands in town. I needed flour, nails, and a light bulb for the hallway. Normal things, grounding things. But when I stepped into Mason's hardware, the whispers met me before the warm air did. "Did you hear about Silas?" a woman murmured near the paint aisle. "No seat at his own granddaughter's wedding," her friend tutted. "Cassandra runs that family now. Everyone knows it. Poor man." I gripped the handle of my basket tighter. I wasn't supposed to hear, but their words clung like burrs to my coat. At the checkout, old Mrs. Whitfield gave me a look that was part pity, part gossip. "Such a shame, Silas. Family ought to honor their elders." She said it loud enough for the next customer to nod along. I thanked her politely, but inside something churned. Pity was worse than exclusion. Pity was a funeral mask people gave the living. Later, at the diner, I slid into a booth for lunch. Evan, a kid I'd known since he was barely tall enough to carry a camera, came over with a pot of coffee. "Mr. Montgomery," he said quietly, "I was at the wedding. I saw what they did. Folks are talking. Some think it was a mistake. Others—" He trailed off, pouring the coffee. "Others think it wasn't," I finished for him. He nodded, guilt in his eyes. "I caught some of it on film, just background shots for the local paper, but you should see it." I agreed to meet him later, but even without the film, I knew the truth. My family hadn't forgotten to give me a seat. They had made a decision. That evening, I sat with my notebook, open. A habit I'd picked up since Elena passed, writing down the truths I couldn't say out loud. On a fresh page, I wrote, "They want me erased." Beneath it, I added another line, "But I am still here." The phone rang then, sharp in the quiet house. It was a cousin, half drunk from the reception's open bar, his words loose. "Silas, people are wondering, why didn't you just stay home? Would have been less awkward for everyone. Cassandra said you insisted on coming, even though you weren't really needed." Not needed. The phrase sat heavy in my chest. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The house groaned against the wind. The watch ticked steady. And in that rhythm, I heard Elena again. Dignity is not given. It's defended. The whispers were growing, I realized. They were shaping me into something small, forgettable. But whispers cut both ways. They could destroy, but they could also spread the truth once someone lit the match. I decided then. I would not let their version stand. Not for Amelia, not for Elena, and not for myself. Tomorrow, I would start listening more closely, watching, gathering, because if they wanted to erase me, they would have to do more than move a chair. They would have to face the truth I carried. The days after the wedding carried a strange stillness, as though the whole town was waiting for something to break. The gossip hadn't died down. It never does in a place where Sunday sermons and diner chatter carry equal weight. But inside my house, silence pressed heavier than any rumor. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table each morning, notebook open, pen balanced between my fingers. The first few pages were filled with fragments, words I overheard, expressions caught on people's faces, the odd phrasing my son used when he spoke to me like I was a burden. But after the wedding, the entries changed. I stopped writing like a man recording indignities and started writing like a man drawing a map. It was Elena's voice that kept me steady. Even gone, she lived in the small rituals. The way her watch ticked on my nightstand, the smell of her lilac perfume still faint on her scarf. She'd always said, "Silas, you can lose a fight loud, or you can win it quiet. Choose quiet." She was right. If I shouted, they'd call me bitter. If I sulked, they'd call me weak. But if I gathered proof, if I waited, if I moved with patience, then the truth would do the shouting for me. I began slowly. I visited the bank under the pretense of updating a safety deposit box. The teller, a young man with eager eyes, pulled my records. I saw my name still attached to the family trust, an old arrangement set up when Richard was still too reckless to handle money on his own. My signature was there, faint but binding. Cassandra's name was listed as secondary. I tucked that knowledge into my notebook like a loaded round. Next, I called an old friend, Walter Avery, who'd practiced law back when I still hammered nails for a living. He was retired now, living down by the lake, but his memory was sharp as ever. Over coffee, I told him pieces, just enough to test the waters, his brow furrowed deeper with each sentence. "They're moving against you, Silas," he said flatly. "Mark my words, that seat they denied you, that was more than an insult. It was a message. They want you invisible when they make their play for the estate." The words burned, but I nodded. So how do I answer? Carefully, paper over temper, and keep every scrap you find. Men like Richard and Cassandra, they'll slip, and when they do, you'll be ready. That night, back in my quiet house, I opened the notebook again and wrote, "This isn't about a chair, it's about erasure. They want me gone before I'm gone." And underneath it, in firmer strokes, "I will not vanish." Resolve is a strange thing. It doesn't roar like anger, and it doesn't weep like grief. It sits inside you like iron, heavy, immovable, unyielding. In that stillness, I felt stronger than I had in years. The next Sunday at church, I wore my best hat and walked with steady steps down the center aisle. The whispers still followed me, but I didn't lower my head. When Cassandra looked away pointedly, when Richard fidgeted under my gaze, I simply offered them a thin smile. They thought they had humiliated me. What they didn't see was that humiliation had burned away something softer in me, leaving only steel. I was no longer just enduring their cruelty. I was preparing. And when the time came, I wouldn't raise my voice. I'd raise the record. Rumor is smoke. Paper is fire. That was the thought that kept circling my head as the week unspooled after the wedding. People in town had opinions, most of them kind, some of them cruel, but none of that would matter if I couldn't lay my hands on what Richard and Cassandra really wanted. You don't deny a man a chair unless you're clearing the room for something else. The first clue came by mistake, or habit, depending on how you look at small-town mail carriers. A thick envelope arrived at my house addressed to R. Montgomery. On any other day, the carrier would have slid it across the street to my son's mailbox, but a winter gust caught her coat, and she waved me an apology as she left it in my hand. The return address read, Green and Bell, Financial Planning. I set it on the table and stared at it like it might hiss. Temptation is a young man's sport. At 72, I prefer caution. Still, I could feel Elena in the kitchen with me, not scolding, not cheering, just reminding me that blindness is a choice. I didn't open it. I called Walter Avery. "Bring it," he said. "Don't slit so much as a corner. If there's trouble inside, we'll meet it dressed properly." Walter slid the envelope into a plastic sleeve like it was evidence, which, as it turned out, it was. He dictated a short note to Green and Bell, asking them to correct the delivery error and to confirm for their records whether any planning touched assets titled to Silas Montgomery or the Montgomery Family Trust, 1999. He used language that felt like granite. We mailed it certified. 2 days later, he had their reply. We read it together at his kitchen table while his old Labrador snored underfoot. The letter was the kind of polite that's really a map if you know how to read one. As discussed with your son and daughter-in-law, preliminary steps have begun to streamline future transfers from trust assets to next of kin. Our office awaits the final durable power of attorney for Mr. Montgomery to proceed with retitling the lake lot and consolidating brokerage accounts. Walter tapped the page with his pen. "There's your room clearing," he said. "They're preparing to move pieces while you're still on the board." I felt heat climb into my face. Not the quick flare of anger, but something slower, older. The lake lot was the one place Elena and I had left untouched by anyone's plans but our own. We used to drive out there on Sunday evenings and sit in lawn chairs while the water took the day apart, wave by easy wave. The deed lived in my safe, paper dry as a bone. There was no power of attorney, not signed by me, not yet, not ever. Can they make one? I asked. They can forge one. Walter's voice was steady. They can bully a signature. They can walk you into a notary's office and mistake consent for fatigue. Or they can file and hope no one checks, because busy offices rubber stamp what looks tidy. I went very still. I could picture it. Cassandra's efficient smile, Richard's distracted charm, a notary who didn't know my face from a billboard. It would take 10 minutes to put a stranger's pen to my authority, 10 minutes to erase a man without the courtesy of a eulogy. That afternoon, I took a slow walk down to the county recorder's office. The clerks there have known me longer than most pastors. I asked for the grantor grantee index on the trust and the lake lot, couching it as a winter project to straighten files. The clerk slid a stack of printouts across the counter and lowered her voice. Mr. Montgomery, someone pulled copies on these last week. Young woman, very neat. Said she was helping the family get organized. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Cassandra doesn't do anything halfway. She'd gotten the map. Now she needed the keys. The second clue didn't come in the mail or from a counter. It came in the form of Nathan Cole. He called the next evening, his voice careful. "Sir, do you have a minute?" "For you," I said, and meant it. I don't know how to say this without sounding like a man gossiping about his new in-laws. He exhaled, a steady, measured sound. "After you left the reception, I overheard Cassandra and Richard talking with a man from Green and Bell. They weren't whispering, they were planning. Cassandra used the phrase, 'move before his spring checkup,' and something about capacity language. When I stepped closer, they smiled too wide and changed the subject. I'm not accusing anyone. I just don't want you surprised. Capacity language. 2 words that turn a living man into paperwork. I thanked him. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't have to. He'd already shown me who he was. That night, I set the safe on the kitchen table and spun the dial by muscle memory. Out came the trust binder, the deed, and a letter Elena wrote the year we updated the documents. A plain, looping hand that made me stop and swallow before I could read. If grief makes us forgetful, remember this. We built what we have on purpose. Don't let anyone tell you you're done building. I slept lightly, less from fear than from the sense a clock had started, somewhere beyond the pocket watch. In the morning, I called my bank and scheduled a profile review. The branch manager, a woman who'd watched Amelia color at the little lobby table as a child, ushered me into her office and locked the door. "What are you actually here for, Silas?" she asked. "I want a note added to my profile," I said. "No powers of attorney on file. No third-party authority. Any presented document requires a call to me and to Walter Avery, and a video verification if I'm not here in person." She typed, shoulders squared. "Done. And I'll brief the desk. We've had situations." On my way out, I stopped at the little copier station by the loan desk and made 3 sets of everything. The trust's control page with my signature, the deed, Walter's letter to Green and Bell, their reply, my new profile note. 1 set went into the safe. 1 went to Walter. 1 I tucked into a nondescript manila envelope and slid into the pocket of my coat. Paper is a poor sword until the day it isn't. The 3rd clue arrived dressed as kindness. Cassandra dropped by unannounced around dinner time, carrying a casserole as if the word grandfather were a synonym for hungry. She air-kissed the kitchen, complimented the neatness of my counters, and sat without being asked. "We've been talking," she said, hands folded, "about next steps. Richard and I think it's time we simplify things for you. The house is big. Winters are hard. You'd be so comfortable in Maple Court. They have a garden club and song nights. We toured it. Very tasteful." "Song nights," I repeated, because when you repeat a thing, sometimes its shape reveals itself. "And with the paperwork squared away, we can manage your bills. Nothing complicated. You sign once and we handle the stress. For Amelia's sake, let's keep things smooth." Her smile asked me to agree to being erased and to thank her for the eraser. "Cassandra," I said, "there's a lot I can no longer lift." Paper isn't one of those things. Something flickered. behind her eyes. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder with color tabs. You don't have to decide now, though Green and Bell has penciled a calendar. If we move before spring, capital gains on the lake lot. The lake lot isn't for sale, I said. She tilted her head as if coaxing a child into shoes. Everything is for sale at the right moment. Don't be stubborn, Silas. Think of Amelia's future. I am, I said. That's why I'm still sitting at my own table. For a moment we just listened to my old clock. Tick, tick. She replaced the folder in her bag, the casserole untouched. You'll hear from us, she said brightly, and stood. The notary is very accommodating. After she left, I put the casserole in the fridge because food is food, even when it's dressed like a bribe. Then I took out my notebook and wrote, Clean and centered. Agenda. Retitle trust assets before spring. Use POA, forged or forced, to move accounts. Sell lake lot. Relocate me to Maple Court. Call it care. Spend it inheritance. I closed the notebook and dialed Walter. They're coming with a pen, I said. He didn't ask for details. Good, he said. Let's give them ink they can't wash off. What's first? First, he said. We record a notice of interest on the lake lot, so no clerk can miss your name. Then we file a standing objection to any POA submitted. Without your voice on a recording, I'll take tomorrow. After that, we wait. When people plan a quiet taking, they get noisy right before the grab. I hung up and set Elena's watch in my palm. The humiliation of the missing chair had felt like a personal wound. This felt like a family diagnosis. The cure wouldn't be a good speech or a clever toast. It would be what it had always been in my life. Measurements, cuts, fittings. Work. Outside, the street was empty except for the neighbor boy practicing free throws under a yellow porch light. The ball thumped, rose, whispered through the net. Practice makes muscle remember what pride forgets. I stood in the doorway and let the cold lift the heat from my face. They wanted me gone before I was gone. They were making plans over appetizers and calling it love. That was fine. I had plans too. Smoke had filled the room long enough. It was time to show them where the fire would come from. The week after Cassandra's casserole visit, the house settled into its usual winter quiet. Snow piled against the porch rails, the furnace clicked and hummed, and my days were measured by the tick of Elena's watch and the scribbles in my notebook. I had expected only silence in that stretch of days. Silence and the slow burn of waiting, but life has a way of surprising even the oldest of us. On Thursday evening, the knock came. Firm, steady, not the kind of hurried tapping Cassandra used when she was pretending to check on me. I opened the door to find Nathan Cole, standing there, a wool coat dusted with snow, his breath steaming in the bitter air. He carried no casserole, no folder, just a kind of earnestness that made me step aside before he asked. Sir, he said as he came in, I hope it's not too late. I wanted to speak privately. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Cassandra had pitched her Maple Court plan. Nathan's presence felt different, solid but respectful. He looked around the room as though taking inventory of the life I'd lived, the photographs on the mantel, the tools lying neatly by the back door, the worn Bible on the counter. I've been thinking about the wedding, he began. His voice was calm, low, but his hands flexed against the mug of coffee I'd offered him. About what happened to you. I need you to know. It wasn't right. It wasn't an accident, either. Amelia told me as much. The words hit me like a cold wind. She told you? He nodded. She said her mother insisted you be kept out of the way. Said it was better for appearances. Amelia wanted to argue, but it was her wedding day. She was pulled in too many directions. She regrets it deeply. I leaned back, staring at the steam curling from my own cup. Part of me wanted to defend my granddaughter, to excuse her silence. Another part, the harder, older part, recognized the truth. Silence can wound as much as words. Nathan cleared his throat. After the ceremony, Cassandra was furious with me. She said I humiliated them by giving you my seat. I told her I didn't give it to you. I gave it back, to its rightful owner. That sentence sat between us like a stone, weighty and unmoving. You've got more courage than the rest of them combined, I said finally. He shook his head. Respect, not courage. Amelia loves you, Mr. Montgomery. I know she does. She's ashamed she didn't fight harder. I just wanted you to hear it from me. We talked for an hour, the conversation weaving from Amelia's childhood memories to the practical matters of family politics. Nathan had seen enough in his short time married to know Cassandra's appetite for control. She and Richard, he said carefully, speak of your estate as if it's already theirs. They assume Amelia and I will fall in line. But I won't, sir, not if it means dishonoring you. I studied him in the soft light of the kitchen. His words were steady, his eyes clear. There was no guile, no performance. He wasn't there to curry favor, he was there to draw a line. And that line, I realized, might one day be the barrier between my dignity and their greed. You remind me of someone, I said. Your son? No, I smiled faintly. Myself, before I learned how heavy a family name can be? Nathan chuckled softly. Amelia said you used to take her to the lake lot, taught her how to skip stones. That lot means more than land, I said. It's memory. It's the only piece of Elena I've still got standing. His expression sobered. Then don't let them take it. If you need me to speak, to stand, to fight, I will. I reached across the table and set my hand over his. Words like that aren't given lightly. Thank you. When he left, the night air rushed in behind him, cold and bracing. I watched him walk down the path, shoulders squared, snow crunching beneath his boots. For the first time since the wedding, I felt less alone. I sat back down, opened my notebook, and wrote, Not all family shares blood. Some share respect. That is enough. Then underneath, in heavier strokes, Nathan is an ally. I closed the book, wound Elena's watch 2 turns, and slipped it back into my pocket. Cassandra and Richard were planning their quiet erasure. But they hadn't counted on Nathan. They hadn't counted on me, either. Not this version of me, tempered and resolute. The missing chair at the wedding had been their declaration. Nathan's gesture was mine. The next move, however, would be mine alone. The winter weeks turned colder, the streets narrowing into white corridors of packed snow. But inside me, heat had started to build. Heat not of anger. Anger is quick, hot, and gone, but of steady fire, like coals beneath iron. Nathan's visit had given me more than comfort. It had given me confirmation. Cassandra and Richard were moving, and they thought I was too old, too blind, too soft to notice. They were wrong. I began with the county recorder's office. The clerks knew me, greeted me with the sort of warmth they give a man they've seen every month for 40 years. Mr. Montgomery, the younger one said, what brings you out in this weather? Tidying up some records, I said, sliding a form across the counter. My voice was light, but my eyes stayed sharp. She returned with a stack of papers, crisp copies of recent pulls on the Montgomery Family Trust and the Lake Lot deed. There it was, in neat handwriting on the request slips, C. Montgomery, Cassandra's neat signature dated just last week. When I asked the clerk if that was unusual, she hesitated, then leaned closer. She mentioned needing them quickly, said she was helping an elder family member transition. I didn't pry, but I wondered. I thanked her and slipped the documents into my folder. As I walked back into the icy wind, I felt the weight of proof pressing against my ribs. She wasn't just curious. She was preparing a transfer. That night, I called Walter. They've pulled copies, I said, not rumor. Paper Walter exhaled into the line, steady but grim. Then it's begun. We'll need to move before they do. Bring me the documents. We sat in his study, the old Labrador snoring by the fire as Walter spread the papers like a general laying out a battlefield. He tapped his pen against the deed. This is your anchor. They can't move the lake lot without presenting a durable power of attorney, which, forgive me, I doubt you've signed. I haven't. Then they'll forge or they'll coerce. We need to make noise in the right places so their silence doesn't succeed. He drafted a notice of interest, a formal claim noting my active oversight of the property. We would file it with the recorder in the morning. That way, he explained, any attempt to sell or retitle triggers a red flag. Even a lazy clerk won't miss it. It was a start, but more proof surfaced before we even had time to file. The following afternoon, I stopped by the diner. Evan, the young man with the camera, waved me over, his expression tight. "Mr. Montgomery, I think you should see this." He slid his phone across the counter. On the screen, a short clip played. Cassandra and Richard standing near the bar at the reception, their voices caught on his camera mic while he filmed guests behind them. Richard, once Dad's paperwork is sorted, it's all clean sailing. Green and Bell just need the POA Cassandra. He'll sign, and if he doesn't, we'll have a draft ready. No one questions an old man's shaky hand. My stomach clenched. They hadn't even lowered their voices. They believed the room and the world was theirs to control. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Evan. "Because it's wrong," he said simply. "And because Amelia deserves to know who's protecting her and who isn't." I thanked him, slipping the phone back. Later that night, he sent me the file. I saved it in 3 places: my desktop, an external drive, and a printed transcript in my safe. Proof multiplies, lies crumble under repetition. Still, I needed more. Proof not only of intent, but of action. So I watched. Cassandra's visits became more frequent, always with food, always with charm, just sharp enough to scrape. She began slipping papers onto the table with the casserole dishes. Harmless-looking forms, information updates, beneficiary confirmations, routine authorizations. "Just sign here, Silas," she'd say with that practiced laugh. "It's easier if we handle it." Each time I smiled faintly, folded the paper, and said, "I'll review it when I'm rested." Then when she left, I slid each into a file marked Attempts. By the 3rd visit, her smile was thinner. By the 5th, Richard was coming with her, hovering at my elbow, his charm brittle as ice. They thought they were clever, bearing poison among routine lines. But I saw it, and I kept every page. Late one night, as I reviewed the growing stack, I realized something. Humiliation had been their first move, not their goal. The missing chair at the wedding wasn't the plan. It was the prelude, an attempt to shrink me, to make me sign away my own place in silence. But instead of shrinking, I was sharpening. In the margin of my notebook, I wrote, "They wanted me invisible, but I'm watching. And this time, I wasn't just a witness. I was gathering the rope they would hang themselves with. Winter lets you hear your house think. The radiators talk in little clicks. The windows test their latches. The stairs remember every foot that's used them." Mine sounded busy that Monday as I laid Walter's forms out on the table. I had proofs now: Cassandra's signature at the recorder's office, the Green and Bell letter, Evan's clipped audio, paper enough to make a noise. Still, something in me wanted one more brace before I started leaning. That brace arrived wearing a blue wool coat and a smile that had steadied me through leaner years. "Are you taking visitors, Silas?" May Hollis called from the porch. She didn't wait for the storm door. She never had. May used to run the credit union branch back when my paycheck still smelled faintly of sawdust. She was the one who'd sat with Elena and me in 1999 and walked us through the trust line by patient line until we could breathe again. "I brought cinnamon rolls," she said, holding up a bakery box, "and a nose for trouble." I set coffee on and let her talk first. May always arrived with a story that explained why she was really there. "You know I help folks with their taxes now," she began, peeling back the lid. "Gets me in and out of living rooms you'd be surprised to see the inside of. Yesterday I was at Maple Court. Don't scowl, I know the look. and I ran into Cassandra in the lobby holding a clipboard, like it was a scepter. She was asking about capacity letters and on-site notarizations for elders with mobility issues. My favorite receptionist told her any such visit would need the client's direct request. Cassandra smiled like an unsheathed knife. I slid the bakery box aside and put the green and bell letter in front of May. She read fast the way practiced people do, lips moving once on retitling and again on durable power of attorney. "She's loading the cart," May said, "and looking for a hill to push you down." "I've got Walter," I said, "and a banker with a spine. But I could use a second pair of eyes." May tapped the stack with a fingernail. "You need more than eyes. You need a capacity packet." "Explain it like I'm a man who would rather build a gazebo than read 3 pages of forms." "Happy to." She pulled a legal pad from her bag. "We make a record you own, a dated video of you reading today's paper, stating the time, the address, your birth date, answering a few orientation questions, then a short exam with me. I'm no doctor, but I know enough checkboxes to make a clerk blush. We attach a letter from Dr. Patel confirming what anyone can see. You're lucid, ornery, and allergic to nonsense. We file a standing objection to third-party authority with every institution that touches your money. And we register a simple instrument with the recorder. Affidavit of intent. You do not authorize any transfer of the lake lot or trust assets absent your written direction and Walter's countersignature. It's not ironclad law, but it's a bell. If someone moves without ringing it, we know." I felt something in my chest settle. "You always did like bells." "I like witnesses," she said, "and we'll get one more. That boy with the camera, Evan, have him set a phone on a shelf in here and let it listen when certain people come calling. People say true things when they think they're tidying." I told her about the casserole, the friendly folders, the sentences sharpened to look like care. May's mouth flattened. "They're prying at the seams because they think your fabric's thin." "Good. Let them keep thinking it." We recorded the video that afternoon. She sat me by the kitchen window where the light forgives wrinkles and asked me to state my name and the date while I held up the front page. She asked me who the governor was, what street we were on, what time my pocket watch read. I answered without hurry, the way you do when you've got nothing to hide. Then May turned the screen toward me and said, "For your grandchildren, anything you want on the record?" I looked into that small black eye and said, "I'm not leaving because winter got long. I will leave when I'm finished." May blinked once and smiled. "Good. Now, the paper." We drove the packet to Walter before sunset. He read and nodded, added a paragraph about notice by certified mail, and sent runners, young paralegals with too much shoe rubber, to the bank, the brokerage, the recorder's office. "By morning," he said, "any clerk who tries to slide a POA under the door will get a splinter." On the way home, May asked if I wanted to stop at the armory for the Rotary supper. I shook my head. "Not tonight. I'd rather sit with my house a while." We pulled up to the curb, and there was Nathan on my steps, hands tucked, a boy in a good coat visiting an elder, 'cause that's what some boys still do. May took to him immediately, as women like May do when decent men appear unannounced with nothing to sell. "I hear you gave away a chair," she said by way of greeting. "I gave it back," he corrected, and won her forever. Inside, I poured 3 coffees and watched the unlikely geometry take shape at my table. A retired branch manager, a new son-in-law, and an old carpenter who had once mistaken being needed for being loved. When I told Nathan about the packet, he nodded like a man who understands wood grain from the way it shines. "If you need another witness for anything," he said, "call me." May pursed her lips. "We may ask you to stand in a doorway and look like a consequence," she said. "Some people only recognize boundaries when there's a person attached." Before she left, May pressed a slim folder into my hand. "Last thing. Decoys." I raised an eyebrow. "We create a fake draft, POA, watermarked, faintly, with a unique typo only we know. We keep it in your desk, where any helper with sticky fingers can find it. If it turns up at a notary or a bank, we'll know who carried it and when. Feels like baiting. Feels like carpentry, May said. Sometimes you tap a nail where you want the eye to go, and a thief obliges. After they were gone, the house felt newly furnished, though nothing had moved. The packet on my table was not a war cry. It was framing, Joyce where there had been air. I slept with the easy fatigue of a man who has put boards in their places. Morning brought a message from the county recorder, time-stamped 8:11. Notice of interest recorded. An hour later, the bank left a voicemail confirming the standing objection was scanned to my profile. At 10, I walked to the mailbox and found a pale envelope from Green and Bell with the polite astonishment of people who discovered their hallway had acquired a locked door overnight. Dear Mr. Montgomery, it began, we have updated our file to reflect your direct oversight. Our office will require your personal authorization for any future planning. Please accept our apologies for any misunderstanding. Walter called moments after I finished it. Now, he said, we don't chase. We let them come. People who want to take a thing quietly do something loud when the easy path closes. Keep your phone on the counter. Keep your patience where you can reach it. I kept both. Cassandra did not disappoint. That afternoon she swept in without knocking, air brisk with a perfume that had learned to announce itself before its owner. Good news, she sang, holding up a folder. Green and Bell is ready to finalize the transition. They sent me a letter, I said, and slid it across the table. Her eyes caught on direct oversight and narrowed the way pupils do when they pass from a bright room into honesty. We'll sort it, she said, smile stapled back in place. They're easily confused by complicated families. Then leave them out of it, I said. There's nothing to sort. She placed the folder on the table anyway and eased a single sheet from its sleeve. The paper purred the way heavy paper does. Just signatures, she said. No rush. But sooner is smoother. I looked down. It was clean. Too clean. My name already typed under a line that waited like an open mouth. May's suggested typo sat nowhere on the page. Not the decoy. This was a real attempt, then. I'll consider it, I said, and slid the sheet into a new folder, marked Presented, while the phone on the shelf listened for the rest. She didn't push. She pivoted. We've booked a notary for Friday, just in case, she said lightly. It's silly to drive downtown in this weather. Friday, I repeated, and thought of Walter's runners, May's bells, Nathan's quiet spine. Let's do Friday. When she left, I stood while at the sink, hands braced on either side, and watched the streetlight burn the afternoon thin. May called to ask, simply, Well? Friday, I said. Good, she answered. We'll be ready. That night, I set Elena's watch beside the capacity packet and listened to them tick at each other like old friends. I was not eager for confrontation, but I was no longer afraid of it. May had returned with more than cinnamon rolls. She'd brought back the part of me that remembers how to brace a beam and wait out the storm. In the morning, we would file 2 more things Walter wanted on the record. After that, I would tidy the house, sharpen a pencil, and put on the navy blazer that makes my back behave. Some people prepare for a fight by practicing their anger. I prefer to polish my patience. The ally had returned. The frame was set. All that remained was for someone to lean on the wrong wall. Friday came dressed in gray clouds, the kind of winter sky that makes noon feel like dusk. I woke early, more from habit than nerves, and laid out the navy blazer, the same one I'd worn to the rehearsal dinner, to the humiliation by the kitchen door. That jacket carried memory, but today it would carry something else. Resolve. Walter called just after breakfast. Recorder's office stamped your affidavit. Bank has your standing objection logged. And the notary Cassandra lined up for Friday. He paused, satisfied. She's on my list of contacts. She'll know to play along. If Cassandra brings anything forged, we'll have it on tape. It was one thing to gather papers in quiet kitchens. It was another to prepare for a stage showdown. But that was the work of patience. They expected me to walk into their trap, weary, confused, ready to surrender. Instead, I was about to turn their own scheme into evidence. By noon, Cassandra swept into my house. Richard a step behind her. She carried a briefcase instead of a casserole this time, and the smile she wore could have been cut from glass. "Dad," she sang as if the words still belonged to her, "we've made this as easy as possible. Just a few signatures, and the notary will be here shortly." She set the documents down in front of me, flipping them open with quick, confident fingers. This one consolidates accounts. This one retitles the lake lot into the trust under our management, and this one simply confirms power of attorney. All routine, I promise. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered. "Routine, you say?" "Absolutely," Richard chimed in. "You've worked hard all your life, Dad. Let us take it from here. You deserve rest." That word again. Rest. It tasted like dismissal. Before I could answer, a knock came at the door. Cassandra beamed. "That'll be the notary." I opened the door and let her in. A woman in a neat coat, briefcase tucked under her arm. She introduced herself, shook my hand, and sat quietly at the table. Cassandra began stacking the papers neatly. "Silas," she said sweetly, "if you'll just sign here." I held up a hand. "Before I sign anything, I'd like the notary to read each document aloud, slowly, for clarity." Cassandra's smile twitched, but she nodded. "Of course." The notary began, voice steady, reading line by line. "Durable power of attorney. Grants full authority to Richard and Cassandra Montgomery over all financial, legal, and medical matters of—" She hesitated, glanced at me, then continued. "Of Silas Montgomery." I let the silence grow heavy. Richard cleared his throat. "It's just a formality, Dad." "Funny," I said, leaning back, "because I don't recall ever agreeing to surrender control of my land, my accounts, or my life." Cassandra's eyes sharpened. "It's standard practice. Everyone does it eventually. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." I looked at the notary. "Would you please note for the record that I have not authorized this document, nor any others presented today, and that I am of sound mind and judgment?" She nodded, pulled out a prepared statement from her case, and began writing. Cassandra's face lost its color. Richard shifted, muttering something about misunderstandings. Then I reached into the folder May had helped me build and pulled out the capacity packet, the video transcript, the doctor's note, the affidavit already filed. I slid it across the table. "You tried to erase me at a wedding," I said quietly. "Then you tried to erase me on paper. But dignity doesn't vanish because you wish it away, and neither does ownership." Richard's jaw tightened. Cassandra began to speak, but the notary raised a hand. "Mr. Montgomery is clear and competent. I cannot notarize documents presented under these circumstances. In fact, I'll be reporting this attempt." The room froze. Cassandra slammed the folder shut, shoved it back into her briefcase, and rose. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "No," I said, standing too. "I'm correcting one." Richard lingered, eyes darting between me and the notary. For a moment I saw the boy he had once been, unsure, caught between right and wrong. But then he followed his wife out the door, leaving only the echo of their anger in the hall. The notary finished her note, handed me a copy, and left with a reassuring nod. When the door shut, the house sighed in relief. I sank into the chair, Elena's watch ticking against my chest. The trap had been set, and they had walked right into it. I had proof now, proof stronger than whispers, thicker than gossip, proof that would carry weight in any room, even a courtroom. In my notebook, I wrote one line. They came with erasure. They left with exposure. The game had shifted, and for the first time, it was shifting in my favor. They didn't wait long. By dusk the same day the notary walked out, Cassandra's SUV slid against the curb like a decision. The door slammed. Heels struck the porch in a metronome of fury. Richard followed, coat unbuttoned, the old nervous lick at the corner of his mouth back like a bad habit. I set my phone on the shelf by the pantry, Screen dark, mic hot. Elena's watch ticked in my pocket, steady as a judge. Cassandra didn't bother to knock. She swept in with the weather behind her. "What you pulled today," she said without greeting, "was a stunt. You embarrassed us. You embarrassed the notary. And you made a mess out of a simple, loving plan." "Loving plans don't need secrecy," I said, and closed the door on the wind. "Nor speed." Richard planted both hands on the table and leaned. "Dad, we're trying to help. You made us look like thieves." "If you aren't, the look will wash off," I said. "Sit down." They didn't. Cassandra slapped a folder onto the table, the same brand as the morning's. "Green and Bell is pausing because of your little objections. That ends now. We brought a physician's letter. We have the notary rescheduled. We'll do this properly." I slid the top page free. It looked official until it didn't. Boilerplate with blanks, shoved full of my name. A signature that belonged to a clinic doctor who once stitched my palm and never saw me forget a name. "This letter doesn't say what you hope it says," I told her. "And even if it did, men don't lose their rights because their children are in a hurry." Cassandra's smile chipped. "You think the town is on your side because you conned a groom into a chair? Optics fade. Paper remains." "You mistake cause and effect," I said. "He saw what you wanted hidden. So will others." Richard tried a softer tone. "Dad, we can't repeat what happened at the wedding. You made everything tense by insisting on being up front." "I insisted on being seated," I said. "You insisted I be unseen." He flinched, then recovered. "This is exactly why we need to move you to Maple Court. Less chaos. Fewer scenes." Cassandra took the cue. "We toured the Lakeview unit. Corner suite, plenty of sun. They'll hold it if we finalize before March. The developer on the lake lot wants to close by April, before the fishing season. Green and Bell says timing is everything with, what was the phrase? Capacity language." She said the words like jewelry she enjoyed wearing. The phone on the shelf caught every syllable. I set the bogus letter down. "You said the quiet part loud," I told her. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Cassandra leaned forward until her perfume drowned the room. "Let's save each other time. You sign the durable power of attorney. We'll handle the accounts. We'll sell the lake lot while the market's high. You can spend your days playing cards and singing 'You Are My Sunshine' with people who won't notice if you nap through dinner. Amelia gets stability. We all get peace." The anger that rose in me wasn't the hot shame of the wedding. It was cold, old, glacier deep. "You want quiet," I said, "not peace. There's a difference." Richard straightened. "If you won't sign," he said, "we'll petition." Judges don't like chaos. We'll tell them about the confusion, the incidents. "What incidents?" I asked. He faltered. Cassandra jumped. "The stove, the bank call, the day you wandered." "I turned off the stove when you left a dish towel on it," I said. "I called the bank to add a note protecting my account. I walked to the recorder's office to file my intent. If you testify, use your whole memory." Color rose in her cheeks. "You're being combative." "I'm being recorded," I said, and let the sentence sit. Her eyes snapped to the pantry shelf, then back to me. Calculations skittering like a mouse. She pivoted to the weapon she trusted most. Scorn. "You can posture all you want, Silas, but in the end, you're an old man with a pocket watch and pride. Pride doesn't pay for caregivers. Pride doesn't sign deeds. Pride doesn't protect your granddaughter when tuition comes due and weddings turn into lawsuits. Leave Amelia out of your math," I said, and my voice went low enough to move furniture. That's when the front steps creaked. A knock, 2 sharp taps, 1 polite pause, cut the room. I opened the door to Nathan, snow on his shoulders, eyes taking in Cassandra's posture, Richard's lean, my hands. "Bad time?" he asked. "Right time," I said. Cassandra pasted on a smile that soured before it dried. "Nathan, this is a private family conversation." He stepped inside anyway, quiet as a consequence. "I'm family," he said, and I'm here for my grandfather-in-law." The title settled like a coat on my shoulders. Richard bristled. "Don't talk around what you don't understand, son." "I understand this," Nathan replied, voice even. "You left him standing in a church to keep him out of photographs. Now you're trying to sign his life to a clipboard. Find better verbs." Cassandra laughed once, brittle. "Do you think your little heroic chair trick makes you the moral center of this family? We built this house long before you carried in your coat." Nathan didn't rise. "You built a house," he said. "He built the foundation." Richard turned on me. "Pick a side, Dad. Ours or the boy who married in last week?" "I picked a side when I signed the trust in 1999, I said. "I picked a side when I taught your daughter to skip stones at the lake. I picked a side when I opened my door to you today and didn't call a deputy. Silence is a tool if you let it. I used it then." Cassandra broke first. "You will regret this," she said. "When the judge hears how you've been manipulated by outsiders, by May, by that old ambulance chaser Walter, by this groom playing hero, you'll lose more than the lake. You'll lose your credibility." "Say that again?" I said. Her eyes flashed. "You'll be declared incompetent. Your capacity will be—" "Thank you," I said softly. I just needed the word clean. On the shelf, the little red dot might as well have been a lighthouse. Nathan shifted his stance half a step closer to my shoulder, a small geography that read, to anyone fluent in families, as declaration. Cassandra saw it and adjusted tactics. "Fine," she said. "Have it your way. We'll see you in court. But don't think the town will applaud a stubborn old man who hoards property out of spite." "Call it whatever helps you sleep," I said. "I call it stewardship." Richard grabbed the folder, pages askew. At the door he paused, softer for a breath. "I didn't want it like this," he said, not to me so much as to the part of himself that still remembered Saturday morning pancakes. "But you always made things hard." "I made you learn to use both hands," I said. "You decided which one to keep clean." They left with the weather, door banging, tires spitting slush. The house expanded around their absence. Nathan let out a breath he'd held long enough to frost glass. "Are you sure you don't want me to call someone?" "I did," I said, picking up the phone and texting Walter and May the audio file with 3 words. "They said everything." Walter's reply came back before my thumb lifted. "File in the morning. Injunction plus petition. Bring the watch." May's answer arrived a beat later. "Blessed be the red dot. Leave the kettle on. I'll bring forms." Nathan reached for his coat. "Do you want me in court?" "If you can be," I said, "if only to stand where they can see you." He nodded. At the door he hesitated. "Amelia will stand too," he said. "It might take her a minute to step out of their weather, but she will." After he left, I rewound the day in my head, the way a craftsman runs his fingers along a seam to feel where the glue took. They had admitted the seating plan. They had laid out the Maple Court timeline. They had named the developer's April date, the forged letter, the POA, the word capacity like a key they meant to turn. They said everything, and now the everything fit into a file. I made tea. The house warmed its hands around the mug. I set Elena's watch beside the phone and listened to both keep time. There is a kind of quiet that follows victory. This wasn't it. This was the quiet of a shop at closing. Tools put away, plan chalked on the wall, morning set to do the work the night prepared. I opened the notebook and wrote, centered and plain, confrontation, captured, intent, admitted, witness, present, next, court. Then I turned out the kitchen light, left the hall lamp for company, and let the house do its thinking while I did mine. Tomorrow would not be about whispers. It would be about records. And in a room where records matter, the man with the watch and the patience walks in taller than the ones with the hurry. The courthouse in our county isn't grand. It's a square brick building with white columns added in the 70s to make it look older than it is. But when I stepped through those glass doors on Monday morning, cane in one hand, folder in the other, it felt as imposing as any cathedral. because this was the place where whispers stopped mattering and paper began to speak. Walter was waiting just inside, coat collar turned up against the cold briefcase tucked under his arm. He greeted me with a nod, not a handshake. "We have everything," he said. "The notary's statement, May's capacity packet, the recorder's notice, the bank's standing objection, Evan's video file, and," he tapped the briefcase, "your recording from Friday night." "Do we need more?" I asked. He gave a thin smile. "In law, you never need more. You just need enough. But we have plenty." The hearing was scheduled for 10. By then, the courtroom benches were half full. Neighbors, cousins, townsfolk who'd heard enough gossip to come see the truth with their own eyes. Cassandra and Richard entered together, their lawyer a polished man with slicked-back hair and a smile sharpened by habit. Cassandra wore confidence like perfume. Richard a suit he didn't quite fill. When the bailiff called the room to order, the air tightened. Judge Harmon took his seat, spectacles low on his nose. "We are here on the petition for guardianship and durable power of attorney concerning Mr. Silas Montgomery," he announced. His voice carried the weight of habit and consequence. Their lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of me as a kindly but confused old man, overwhelmed by paperwork and ripe for mistakes. He spoke of family unity and streamlined transitions, phrases that dressed ambition in the language of care. Cassandra nodded at all the right moments. Richard looked pained, as though the burden of his father's fragility was too much for him. Then it was Walter's turn. He rose slowly, adjusted his glasses, and began not with argument, but with evidence. "Your Honor, I submit Exhibit A," he said, placing May's capacity packet on the table. "A dated video of Mr. Montgomery stating his identity, location, and the contents of that day's newspaper, accompanied by a physician's letter attesting to his full mental competence." The judge glanced at the video stills. Cassandra's smile slipped a fraction. "Exhibit B," Walter continued. "A letter from Green and Bell Financial, indicating that petitioners approached them about transferring trust assets before securing any lawful authority. Exhibit C, notarized statements documenting an attempted presentation of a fraudulent power of attorney. Exhibit D, a recording made at Mr. Montgomery's residence on Friday evening. He paused just long. Enough. It captures petitioners themselves acknowledging their intent to transfer property against Mr. Montgomery's wishes. The judge leaned forward. "Play the recording." The bailiff set the speaker on the table, and there it was, Cassandra's voice, sharp and clear. "We'll sell the lake lot while the market's high. He'll sign, and if he doesn't, we'll have a draft ready. No one questions an old man's shaky hand." Gasps rippled through the benches. Richard's head dropped. Cassandra's eyes narrowed, but the color drained from her cheeks. Their lawyer coughed, shuffled papers, muttered about context, but the sound of her voice hung in the air like smoke. When the recording ended, Walter spoke calmly. "Your Honor, this is not guardianship. It is theft in preparation. My client is not only competent, he is the victim of a calculated attempt to erase his rights. We ask that the petition be dismissed with prejudice, and that a protective order be entered preventing further interference with his estate." The judge turned his gaze on me. "Mr. Montgomery, do you wish to address the court?" I rose slowly, leaning on the cane, folder under my arm. The room stilled. "I built my life with two things, my hands and my name," I said. "At my granddaughter's wedding, they tried to take my seat. At home, they tried to take my signature. But dignity doesn't vanish because someone decides it should. I am here. I am competent, and I will not be erased." Silence followed, heavy, undeniable. Judge Harmon cleared his throat. "Petition denied. Protective order granted. The record will reflect Mr. Montgomery's competence and sole authority over his trust and properties. Petitioners are barred from further action without court review." The gavel came down, firm as a nail set into oak. Cassandra's lawyer gathered his papers quickly, eyes avoiding hers. Richard slumped as though the years he'd tried to unload on me had landed squarely on his shoulders. Cassandra stood frozen, jaw tight, mask cracked. As I turned to leave, I felt the eyes of the room on me, not to pity this time, but respect. Nathan met me at the door, hand on my arm. Amelia stood behind him, tears shining, lips forming one word, Grandpa. And for the first time since that empty pew, I believed I was seen. The courtroom emptied slowly, the way theaters do when the play has gone somewhere no one expected. People lingered in the aisles, whispering, their eyes flicking toward me and then away again, as if they'd just seen a man step out of a grave and walk on. I stayed seated for a moment after the gavel, Elena's watch warm against my palm. My legs could have carried me out, but I needed to feel the silence sink in, the silence that follows when truth outweighs noise. Judge Harmon hadn't left yet. He leaned back in his chair, shuffling his notes, before clearing his throat again. "Mr. Montgomery," he said, and his voice carried a new cadence, not just procedural, but personal. "For the record, let it be stated plainly. The Montgomery Family Trust remains under the full and sole authority of Silas Edward Montgomery." There it was, my name, spoken in a room where Cassandra and Richard had come to erase it. Spoken by the one man in that building whose word was more than opinion, more than rumor, more than a whisper behind a church pew. It was official, carved into the record. The sound settled deep, like a chisel striking stone. Silas Edward Montgomery. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat. Elena's voice rose in the quiet of my memory. "Names endure if you protect them. A man is more than property, more than paper, but without his name, he is neither." When I opened them, Cassandra was staring at me across the aisle, her fury naked now, her composure a thin veil slipping. Richard couldn't meet my gaze. His shoulders were rounded, his face pale. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. Dignity doesn't need to. The judge continued. "This court acknowledges Mr. Montgomery's competence in managing his affairs. Let no institution or individual act contrary to this record without due process." He tapped his gavel lightly, a punctuation mark to a sentence that had already been written. Every syllable was a stone wall between me and their schemes. As I rose, Nathan was there, steady, the kind of presence that makes a man feel younger by a decade. "You heard it," he said softly. "I heard it," I answered, and so did everyone else. We walked together through the aisle. People stood, not all, but enough. Some touched my shoulder, some nodded, some simply stepped aside. Respect doesn't roar. It parts like water when it recognizes weight. At the courthouse steps, Amelia waited. Her eyes brimmed, her cheeks flushed against the winter air. She stepped forward, took my hands, and said, "Grandpa, I'm sorry. For all of it, for not speaking sooner." I squeezed her fingers gently. "You spoke today. That's enough." Behind her, Cassandra seethed, muttering into her phone, her lawyer trailing like a shadow already thinner than it had been. Richard lingered at the bottom step, looking at me like a man trying to recall how to build a bridge he'd burned. The cold bit my face, but inside, warmth spread. Not triumph, not revenge, something steadier. The knowledge that they hadn't succeeded, that I had not been erased, that my name, spoken by the judge, written into the record, stood taller than their greed. When I got home, I set my folder down, wound Elena's watch, and opened my notebook. On a fresh page, I wrote one line in slow, steady script. Today, the judge read my name, and I underlined it twice. Word in a small town spreads like wildfire, and after the hearing, there was no stopping it. By sunrise, folks at the gas station were already murmuring. At the diner, conversation shifted from church news to courthouse talk, and in the barber shop, I was no longer the man whispered about for being left without a seat at his granddaughter's wedding. I was the man whose name the judge read aloud. I stopped in for coffee that morning. The place went quiet as I entered, but not the hush of pity anymore. This silence carried weight, like respect passing from one set of lips to another. Someone at the counter raised their mug slightly, a quiet salute. A young waitress who had once avoided my table now hurried over, smile awkward but genuine. "Mr. Montgomery, coffee's on the house today." I thanked her and took a booth by the window. Through the glass I could see neighbors leaning against trucks, talking low, shaking their heads. I caught bits of it as they passed. She tried to take it all. Imagine, from her own father-in-law. Another voice, Silas, showed them. Stood tall. Not many men can do that at his age. For years, pity had been the undertone of every glance. But now? Now people carried my story like a cautionary tale, and Cassandra's name had become the warning etched into it. By afternoon, Richard came to the house alone. His knock was soft, hesitant. I opened the door to find him standing there without Cassandra's shadow behind him. His eyes were tired, his hair uncombed, the arrogance stripped away. "Dad," he said, voice low, "can I come in?" We sat at the table, the same table where so many battles had been fought in silence. He rubbed his palms together, words slow to form. "I didn't think it would go this far. Cassandra said it was just paperwork, that we were keeping things simple. I wanted to believe her." "You didn't just believe her," I said evenly. "You stood beside her while she tried to erase me." He winced, eyes dropping. I was weak. I thought going along was easier than standing up. But yesterday, hearing the judge, hearing your name, I realized what I'd almost done. He swallowed hard. "I betrayed you." The truth of it hung between us. I didn't soften it, didn't rush to console. Some truths deserve to sting. "You have a daughter who loves me," I said finally. "Do not let her grow up watching her father try to erase his own blood. She needs better than that." Richard nodded, tears brimming, though he tried to hide them. "I can't undo what's been done, Dad, but I want to make it right." "Then start by remembering what a Montgomery name is worth," I said. "It's not a signature to be stolen. It's work, it's honor, it's the truth people speak when you leave the room. Don't trade it for convenience again." He left quieter than he came, shoulders bowed. Whether he'd change, only time would tell. But for the first time in years, I saw not Cassandra's puppet, but my son standing uncertain at a crossroads. Later that evening, Cassandra came storming up the porch. Alone this time, her pride cracked into shards, sharp enough to cut. She didn't knock. She barged in, eyes flashing. "You've ruined us," she hissed, voice low but vibrating with venom. "The entire town is laughing. Do you understand the humiliation you've brought on this family?" "No," I said calmly, rising from my chair. "You brought it. You tried to steal dignity, property, and respect, and you thought no one would notice." She scoffed. "Everyone takes what they can in this world. You were too slow to keep up. I only did what anyone would." I stepped closer, letting my voice drop to a steel whisper. "Not anyone. Only those who mistake greed for love. You may carry my son's last name, but you will never carry this family's honor." Her face flushed, her mouth twisted. "You think this is over? You think one judge's word fixes everything?" "It does more than fix," I said. "It exposes. From now on, every neighbor, every friend, every member of this town will know who tried to erase me and who failed." For once she had no words. Her silence was louder than her fury. She turned, heels striking the floor like gavel blows, and left the house without looking back. When the door shut, the silence that remained wasn't empty. It was full, full of the dignity I had defended, full of the respect I had regained. That night, I sat at the table with my notebook. The words came steady, my hand sure. They whispered I was finished. They planned to erase me. But the judge read my name, and now the whispers are theirs to carry. I closed the book, wound Elena's watch, and let the silence of the house remind me. Some victories don't roar. They hum, steady and eternal, like time itself. The week after the hearing passed like the slow thaw of ice. Nothing dramatic cracked. Things simply loosened, drip by measured drip, until the shape of life looked like itself again. I woke earlier, breathed easier, and found myself lingering over coffee the way I used to when Elena would hum in the kitchen and the day hadn't yet decided what it wanted from us. The pocket watch ticked on the table, steady as a heartbeat, and for once I wasn't listening for anything beyond that sound. The first place I went was the lake lot. I took the road that runs past the mill and then turns to gravel, crunching under the tires in a rhythm I've known since the boards on my first truck rattled to the same beat. The air was glass cold. The lake lay flat, except where a stubborn wind stitched small seams across its surface. I parked beside the cedar we planted the year Amelia turned 5, its trunk thicker now, its shadow longer, as if time had decided to stand guard. I brought 2 folding chairs. Habit, I suppose, or muscle memory of all the Sundays. Elena and I sat out there talking about nothing and everything. I set one chair up and left the other folded beside it, not as a monument, but as a promise. I said her name aloud, just her name, and the silence answered like a friend who understands that words are sometimes a kindness, sometimes a waste. The deed to this land was in my coat pocket, not because I didn't trust the filings, but because paper feels different when it warms to the body it belongs to. I read the legal description under my breath, those odd syllables of surveyors and corners and rods, and when I finished, I laughed, quiet and clean. The lake didn't need to know its boundaries to keep being water, but the world needed to be told in ink that mine would be honored. News travels odd routes when it shifts from rumor to record. Mrs. Whitfield from the diner started including an extra slice of pie without comment. The barber told me the chair was ready whenever it was, for the man who put his spine where his name is. The bank manager called to say they'd added additional alerts to my profile at no charge. I didn't ask for any of it. Respect is best accepted like weather. You notice it, you dress for it, you don't pretend you made it. It was Amelia who brought the first real spring. She called one afternoon and asked if she and Nathan could stop by for a few minutes. Minutes turned into an evening, the kind of quiet conversation that makes a room expand. She apologized, not in a performance, but in a dozen specific ways, for the rehearsal, for the pew, for the way her eyes slid past me because she didn't know how to square love with pressure. I told her that only thing that mattered was what she did when the pressure had a name. She took my hand and cried like the child who once hid in my coat when thunder made the windows shake. Then Nathan, steady and careful as always, set a bundle on the table and unwrapped it. We had something made, he said. Inside lay a chair, oak, taut-grained, the kind a body trusts. On the top rail, hand-carved, were 4 words, Silas Montgomery's seat. It belongs wherever you sit, he said, a shy grin just under the words, at church, at our table, at the lake. If anyone asks whose it is, they'll have to read it out loud. I ran my fingers over the letters. The cut was clean, the depth right, not a gouge, a certainty. You've married well, I told Amelia again. She nodded, already knowing. We made plans that night for a small gathering at the armory. Nothing grand, just coffee and cake and a microphone that would listen while I thanked the people who helped me remember who I was. Walter grumbled and said lawyers don't like microphones, then showed up early in his best tie and shook my hand like a man who'd just driven a nail home in one swing. May arrived with 2 pies and 3 lists and organized the chairs like a field marshal. Evan stood in the back with his camera and caught the kind of smiles that end up in frames. I kept my remarks short. Dignity doesn't need a long speech. It needs a straight line. I thanked the judge for reading my name, the banker for believing it, the notary for refusing to bless a lie. I thanked Nathan for the seat, Amelia for her courage, and Walter and May for teaching me that patience can carry a gavel if you put paper in its hand. I did not mention Cassandra by name. Some things you let the town carry, and they were carrying it fine. Richard came late and stood at the back. his hat in his hands, looking like a boy who'd wandered into the wrong room and then realized it was the right one. When the applause settled into soft talk, he stepped forward, face raw with something like resolve. "Dad," he said, "I can't ask forgiveness and spend it like money. I'll just start showing up where work is." "Good," I said. "The gutters have been talking." He smiled at that, small and true, and the next afternoon he was on my ladder with a bucket and a look on his face that belonged more to the son I once taught to square a frame than to the man who tried to sign away someone else's measurements. I didn't trust him all at once. Trust is a tool you hone and use carefully after it's nicked you. But we worked without fighting, and that's a start. As for Cassandra, absence did what argument never could. She didn't stop by. She didn't call. I heard from a cousin that Green and Bell had reevaluated their relationship, which is professional speech, for we don't like the smell of smoke. The notary filed her report. The county recorder added a bright, permanent flag to my file. If Cassandra wanted to move again, she'd have to do it in a room with lights, and light is the one thing her plans never liked. On a mild Saturday, Amelia and Nathan picked me up and drove me to the lake. We set the carved chair under the cedar and took turns sitting like it was a sacrament. Amelia asked if we could make it a ritual. First day of spring, out at the lot, pancakes after, a walk around the bend where the cattails start. "Bring children when they arrive," I said, surprising myself with the hope in my own voice. Nathan laughed and said he'd teach them to carve their initials into scrap pieces before he let them near a finished rail. We stayed until the sun slid down behind the far ridge and the water turned the color of pewter. Birds skimmed low. A dog barked twice on the opposite shore as if to mark the hour. Before we folded the chair, Amelia pressed her palm to the carved words. "Your name looks right here," she said. "It looks like it belongs." "It does," I said. "And it will." That night, back at the house, I wrote in my notebook one last time for this season. Not a ledger of insults or a timeline of filings. Just a line I wanted to see when the weather turned hard again. They left me no seat. I learned to carry my own. I closed the book and set it beside the watch. The house settled the way houses do when they like the way you're using them. Wood remembering warmth, pipes easing, the small noises of peace. I thought about the chair's rail and the judge's gavel and the lake's patient edge. 3 kinds of line, each honest in its way. People will keep talking. Towns always do. In a month they'll have a new story. But this one will remain where it matters, in Amelia's memory, in Nathan's hands, in the courthouse record, in a cedar's shade. Dignity is not something you win once and hang on the wall. It's something you practice the way you practice breathing, the way you practice waiting for storms to pass without letting the roof rot. Before bed, I wound the watch. The spring took the turns without complaint. I held it to my ear 1 second longer than I needed and heard what I wanted to hear, time keeping faith with itself. Then I set it on the nightstand and let the dark come without argument. In the morning there would be ordinary tasks, bread to slice, a hinge to oil, a call to return if Richard remembered what apologizing feels like and wanted to try again. Ordinary feels like a luxury after you've had to defend your name. At my granddaughter's wedding, they left no seat for me. A groom stood up and offered me his chair. In court, a judge spoke my name. At the lake, we carved it where the wind can read it. That is enough. The rest is weather. And I have learned, finally and fully, how to stand in it. If you felt this story in your heart, don't forget to like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this. And tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from?